Welcome to CivilNet. We're going to continue our conversation today about Syria and the Middle East, especially with the events going on now in Palestine and Gaza. We're going to be speaking with a Syrian analyst, journalist, who is currently in London. Sharif Nashashibi is going to talk to us about his take on what it seems to be only a more complicated situation as days go on. Sharif, thank you for being with us on CivilNet.
Thank you for having me.
And you are in London.
Yes.
And when was the last time you were in the Middle East?
The last time was probably about 6 weeks ago.
And
I go, you know, at least a few times a year. So I'm a frequent visitor.
And where were you?
I was in Jordan. My mom and my aunt moved there in the last few years, so I travel there quite frequently to see them.
Well, this is as good a time as any to say that on your mom's side, you're Armenian.
Yes.
And you're originally your family's from Aleppo?
Yes, from Aleppo, yeah.
And I assume they ended up there, at least your mother's side, as a result of the deportations.
Well, I don't know exactly how long they've been there, but I know that my great-grandparents were involved in arranging safe passage and shelter for Armenian refugees in Lebanon and Syria during the Ottoman time. So they've certainly been there, at least from that time.
Well, that's as good an opening as any to talk about the fact that we're talking about safe passage and refugees all over again 100 years ago, 100 years later.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic because, I have, members of my mother's family that are old enough to remember being refugees and going to Syria, and now they've fled Syria because of the violence, and now they're pretty much refugees in Lebanon at the moment. So the tragedy is repeating itself, unfortunately.
We talk a lot on CivilNet for obvious reasons about the Armenian minority, the Armenian refugees. Tell us what's happening to the other minorities of Syria.
Well, it's a very difficult situation because under Bashar Assad, minorities fared well, as they did before Bashar Assad. It has to be stated. So minorities have been very torn between obviously wanting freedom and dignity for all Syrians, but also not wanting to lose their status in Syria. They're afraid of the Islamicization, let's say, of Syria, and that they will lose their rights and their position. And these minorities are Syrian, and Syria is their home, and they're very proud to be Syrian. So they're very afraid for their future. And on the other side, that has been interpreted by some people as support for the government, and that means that they have been targeted because of this perceived support. So it's a very difficult situation. I mean, I tell minorities that in Syria that I understand their concerns, but in order to allay these concerns, they must stand with the majority, because Bashar Assad's days are numbered, and it must be ensured that what follows afterwards is an inclusive society where minorities feel safe and respected, but that also the majority are as well. They're all in it together, and one cannot ensure the rights of one side without ensuring the rights of the other.
What we hear from Armenian refugees, or temporarily Syrians in exile, as some of them call themselves, this hanging from the sky sort of group, what we hear from them is that at least there was stability and, as you say, protection and tolerance towards them in the decades past. And today, either intentionally groups involved with the opposing forces, or unintentionally, just a function of the chaos, Armenians are certainly not safe, as other minorities as well. In that context, how are they going to understand that really this is a deeper political issue and not one about Armenians versus the world?
Well, look, minorities, not just Armenians, minorities in Syria have to remember that there has been harmonious coexistence between in Syrian society, which is a very ethnically mixed society. There has been harmonious coexistence well before Bashar Assad and his father, before the Ba'ath Party came into power in Syria. Since the times of the Ottoman times, there have been harmonious coexistence. So this is not particular to the Assads. And minorities need to remember that Syria is an inclusive society by nature. And what's happening now is very unfortunate. But one cannot, not just in Syria, but in general, one cannot ensure the rights of minorities by repressing the rights of the majority. And also the majority need to realize that, to be inclusive and to have a free and prosperous society, they must also ensure the rights of the minorities. So it is, it is a symbiotic relationship in such a diverse country as Syria. You cannot ensure the rights of one by neglecting the rights of the other. They're all in it together. And this is what's so worrying about developments in Syria now, is that they've taken on a momentum where, there is a sectarianism that certainly in my lifetime I haven't seen in Syria. And my mother is extremely sad because she grew up in Syria, and she again, this is something completely new to her. She's never seen it like this, and unfortunately, it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy where, for instance, the government is constantly playing up the sectarian nature of the conflict, and it is becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's becoming sectarianism, and the fear is that have we reached the point of no going back? And I hope we haven't. I hope that's not the case.
Why do you think the fear of Islamization is so overwhelming, given the fact that, as you say, for decades it's been a hospitable environment? I
think, look, for one thing, it's not just a fear among minorities. It's a fear among a largely secular Muslim majority as well, that no one wants the Islamicization of Syria other than the Islamists. I think the byproduct of this is, and this is not just regarding Syria, but in other countries where expression of Muslim faith has been repressed, or generally where political dissent has been repressed, the only way of expressing that dissent has been through the mosque. And this has happened in various Muslim countries. So when this political dissent is finally allowed to express itself without government repression, it expresses itself in an Islamic kind of way. And this is the problem with all these secular dictatorships. They've repressed political dissent so much that the only way of doing that was through the mosque. And this is what we're seeing now, that there was a swing from a secular dictatorship, but now there's this Islamicization, and the pendulum has to stop somewhere in the middle, where all faiths are respected, and secularism is respected just as much as religion.
You said a little while ago that Bashar al-Assad's days are numbered, and that's a turning point that many analysts have only recently reached. Nobody was saying that at the beginning. You also expressed hope that perhaps things can go back to the days of tolerant, inclusive Syria. Do you think that point of return has not been passed?
Of having an inclusive Syria?
Yeah, are we past that point of no return?
I don't think in a country as diverse and ethnically mixed as Syria, I don't think we have a choice. It has to be inclusive. There is such a patchwork of societies there that you're either an inclusive society or you destroy each other, and the answer cannot be to destroy each other. We have to live together. Certainly, what's happening now is unprecedented, and it's very sad. But that too, like Bashar Assad, will not last forever, and we will get back to a point where Syria is as inclusive and tolerant as it has been historically. This is certainly my hope, and I hope I'm right.
Whether we like it or not, the flare-up in Gaza these days is a reminder of the fact that these conflicts really can go on pretty much forever. And that your rational sort of approach that, for Pete's sake, with all these minorities, with all these majority differences as well, with this variety, this diversity, it's got to be inclusive. That rationale doesn't seem to work. I mean, Gaza is, every couple of years being destroyed. Israel forever is living with this security phobia, and here we are.
Unfortunately, the curse of the Middle East is there are so many outside powers and interests involved in the Middle East that any conflict is protracted because of other interests involved. I mean, if you look at Syria, if there were not so many powers involved on both sides of the conflict, I don't think the conflict would last as long as it's been lasting. It's being prolonged because people outside Syria have staked their interests on one side or the other winning, and if the other side wins, then they lose their interests. So it's become a very entrenched situation. Same with Israel and Palestine. If were it not for the U.S. protection militarily and diplomatically of Israel, I don't think the conflict would have lasted as long as it has. So unfortunately, it's foreign powers almost have a morbid interest in maintaining these tensions because they profit from it. It's a very sad fact, but they do.
Final question: the Doha Agreement coalition, the potential of now receiving greater aid by the various opposition forces from the West. Is that going to help balance things out, or is that going to really protract what we have on the ground already in Syria?
It's difficult to say right now because this new coalition is untried and untested. It's very new. Sorry, we don't know how it's going to fare, if it will last even. It has been as inclusive as it can be, although it's worrying that there are certain Islamist groups, for instance, that have rejected the coalition, and the SNC were reluctant partners within the coalition.
The Syrian National Council.
Yes. So it's a wait-and-see situation. I think what might make it easier in this case was there was a great deal of worry before the coalition was established that there were weapons being sent to Syria and people didn't really know whose hands they were getting into. And I think what might help with this kind of unified coalition is to have a singular system, a mechanism where arms are channeled exactly where they're supposed to be channeled and don't fall into the wrong hands. And I think the wrong hands here are in the hands of people that are trying to stoke sectarianism in Syria. Particularly these Islamist groups, and I would hope that this will mean that aid to the Syrian opposition will fall into the opposition that believes in an inclusive Syria. But again, it's a wait-and-see situation.
Thank you. We've been talking with Sharif Nashashibi, a Syrian journalist, a Middle East analyst living in London. Sharif, thank you for being with us on CivilNet.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for the concluding words of hope. We'll continue to talk about this topic that's not just complicated, but also increasingly painful. Thank you for watching CivilNet.